So on today's episode of Checking Back My Power, I've got another one of my work colleagues called Chris. And I'm just going to be asking him to give an example of a situation where he felt his power was taken away from him, and what did he do? What did he learn from the situation? If he could do things differently, what would he do? And if there's any advice to the listeners he can give. So thank you, Chris, for joining me.
It's okay. Hello. Good morning.
Hello. Good morning. So yeah, can you give a situation or an example of a circumstance in your life when you felt your power was taken away from you?
Well, I suppose the biggest thing that ever happened in my life was when my dad died. Is that the kind of thing you mean? Sort of where
Yeah, it can be
it
can be anything. Anything. It can be a personal experience. It can be a professional experience. Whatever experience.
Well, that's by far my dad died was by far the biggest thing that ever happened to me, that had the most impact on me, the most serious thing that ever happened to me. And I was surprised by how I coped with it. When I first became aware that he was ill and that he probably would die, I just thought I wouldn't be able to cope. I just thought that was it.
So if you don't mind me asking, how long ago was this, and how
this
did
was
your dad die?
5 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, 5 years ago. And it just, obviously, everyone dies at some point. You know your parents are going to die. In most cases, they die before you do, generally speaking. And, so obviously, I suppose I knew it would happen at some point, but it just seemed incomprehensible to me that it would happen. I mean, it's the same for everyone, I suppose. You almost think your parents are invincible in a way, even though they're not really. And so when he was ill, and it just seemed incomprehensible that he would die, and I just thought I wouldn't be able to cope with it at all. But the fact is, I did cope with it, and I think that did strengthen me in a way. It showed that I realized that I could face something that seemed totally awful and incomprehensible and actually survive it.
So you talk about it. You talk about it strengthening you. How did it strengthen you?
I think it made me realize that I can cope with terrible things happening, even though it was it's the first time I'd ever faced something really awful, but it wasn't, it was a fairly normal thing as well. Obviously, your parents do die at some point. It's more likely when they're older, and I realize it's far worse losing an older parent. I don't think generally is as bad as losing a partner, husband or wife, or a child, or so I do appreciate that. But just in my world, in my consciousness, it was the worst thing that had ever happened to me, and therefore I had to find a way of dealing with it. And
so how did you deal with it?
I found talking to people helped who'd been through the same thing, which I didn't think would particularly help, but it did. And one thing that helped me to see, it's important to try and keep some sense of normality and routine, even when things are terrible. So you try and keep some sense. Just try and keep some sense of normality, which is quite difficult. And I thought that would be impossible. But I just found that it was just to keep doing things that I like doing, and trying to maintain normality as much as possible, especially when I was at home visiting my dad. And I also coped by, I went for a lot of walks when I went to see him, either when he was in hospital, I went home when he was at home for a while. I just walked a lot, which I found really comforting, and especially walking around places that I'd been when I was a child or a teenager, like the route I used to walk to school and things like that. And I found it very, I found that quite comforting. I think it was just, I had some, counselling through work after my dad died, and I found that quite useful because, I mean, the counsellor approached it not in a particularly emotional way, but more of in an intellectual way, which I don't know if you thought, I don't know why he did that with me, but
yeah,
it wasn't the kind of counselling where I went in and burst into tears, because the counsellor didn't really seem like that kind of person to me. He helped me understand it more in a sort of psychological way, which I found it doesn't sound that useful, but I actually found it quite useful. And he explained to me about how people process death mentally, and he talked about different theories about how there's some theories you don't really feel like a whole adult person until your parents have died, because I can't really remember the exact theory, but it is part of becoming an adult and a grown-up, which might not happen until you're 50, 60 or older sometimes. But I just found all this quite interesting, and thinking about it it sounds a bit cold in a way, I suppose, but thinking about it in quite a sort of intellectual way sort of helped me, as well as the emotional aspects of it. I'm not making it sound that useful, but I found it useful. Yeah.
So, and because you also talked about in your last podcast that you're part of a band and you play music. So was that something that helped you in your dad's passing?
Actually, it was very important, because I played the guitar for a long time, since I was about 12, but just before my dad died, I started learning the drums. And that was incredibly important for helping me cope with him dying. There was something about it, because it's quite physical. It's quite a physical activity, playing the drums.
Yeah.
And it's quite good for you mentally as well. And there's something about doing it that really kind of took me out of myself and helped me to cope with it, and feel like I could cope. There's something about it that made me feel like that, and I don't know quite what it was. I mean, a lot of people do say that drumming is very good for you, sort of mentally, and it really helped me cope, and it almost altered my personality in some ways, because I was determined to become, better at playing the drums and to learn it properly, and I just kept doing it, and I didn't give up even when I found it a bit difficult. And I think that helped. It helped to make me a sort of stronger person as well, in a way. So that really, really helped.
And then obviously, living with your father, did that help as well? Was she quite comforting and understanding? And
oh yes, of course, yes, she's very. I don't know what I would have done without her. She was really important. Yeah. So I mean, I don't want to overstate it. I mean, obviously, he was 74 when he died, which is not really old, but he's not young either. And he had a very good life, and even though he had cancer, he didn't suffer. So I am grateful for those kind of things. I don't want to kind of overstate how awful it was. It was awful for me personally, but I am aware that other people have far worse situations when parents die where they're younger, or they're in a lot of pain or whatever. But it was just a big thing that happened to me, I suppose, when I haven't had many big things happen. So I suppose you can only judge and think about things from the situation you're in. And my situation was that was the first time any major upset had happened in my life.
So, like, if you could go back 5 years ago and do anything different, like, would you?
I don't think I would. I don't really have any regrets about it in that kind of way. I think when I faced previous problems in my life, which were more minor, I wish I'd dealt with them better. And I think...
Can you give an example?
I think a lot of the time when, obviously I'm a musician, I play the guitar. When I was at school, I was in a band with other people at school, and they, I really enjoyed it, but they kicked me out of it for various reasons. When I was about 14, I was absolutely devastated, and I didn't really play in a band for quite a long time after that. And seems like quite a minor thing, but it really knocked me back, and I just didn't seem able to. It really knocked my confidence, and I really just couldn't get past it. It really upset me, and I wish I'd just thought, well, I'm just going to carry on, and I don't care, and I'm just going to keep going. I wish I'd had that kind of confidence and resilience when I was 14. Do you see what I mean?
So okay. So you said so you started playing when you were 14, and then because of an setback, you decided to give it a go. So how far along was the gap until you?
I kept playing still, but it really upset me and knocked my confidence. So it was probably, a few years before I had the confidence to join another band properly. And I was always lacking in confidence. I mean, I still did it and still played with other people sometimes, but I was just really, really lacking in confidence, and I think looking back, I just, there was no need for me to feel as bad as that about it. But, I was only 14, maybe 15 at the time. And I suppose quite fragile, sort of oversensitive person in a way. And I don't really like having regrets about things, but in a way, I wish I could have been a bit more resilient. Because when I started learning to play the drums, I did join bands, and obviously at first I wasn't really good enough to be in them, and that, not in a horrible way where they tell me, but I didn't care. I just kept going and going and going, until I got really, good enough to play with other people. And I wish I'd had that kind of resilience when I was younger, but I mean, you don't always. That's for most people. I think that's something that comes with age.
Yeah. So going back to when you were 15, and you didn't, you had a bit of a scary moment when you had a setback. So was there a particular moment or a particular episode when either someone gave you that confidence and you thought, what, I'm going to try again?
There wasn't really a specific time. It was just over time, I just became more determined to sort of give it another try, really, and to try joining another band. So there wasn't really one incident. I still, even when I did it, I still felt a bit uncertain and a bit worried. But gradually, I think, just getting older and, I suppose more mature in a way, I just developed more resilience. But that was, I think, even for being 15,